Take the $40,000 and get out of my wife's life. That was the sentence my son-in-law said to me while sliding an envelope full of cash across the table in front of his entire family. 10 minutes later, they would accuse me of stealing a diamond necklace. 5 minutes after that, my own daughter would help them search my purse. And before the night was over, the same people who tried to throw me out of their lives would realize I had the power to take everything they owned. Most people would have shouted. Most people would have cried. Instead, I took the envelope, walked over to the fireplace in their dining room, and threw the $40,000 straight into the fire. The flames swallowed the cash in seconds, and the sound that followed wasn't screaming. It was silence. The kind of silence that only happens when rich people watch money burn. And the moment my daughter reached into my purse a few minutes later, I already knew exactly how the night would end. If you feel even a little sympathy for me right now, take a second to like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. You might be surprised to find that someone very close to you is listening to this story at the exact same moment. But to understand why that dinner turned into a disaster for the Whitmore family, you have to start a little earlier. My name is Ruth Thompson. I'm 68 years old, a black woman who raised one daughter alone after my husband died 30 years ago. My daughter's name is Angela, and the man who tried to pay me to disappear that night was her husband. The son-in-law comes from one of those families that believes money is the same thing as class. The Whitmores built their fortune in finance, investment firms, and real estate deals that put their name on half the buildings in their town. The kind of people who think a person's worth can be measured by their address, their car, and the label inside their jacket. People like me make them uncomfortable. I drove up to the Whitmore estate just before sunset that evening. The long driveway curved through acres of trimmed hedges and old oak trees before finally opening up to a massive stone mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. And sitting in front of that house was my car, a faded blue 1999 Ford Taurus. It still ran perfectly, but next to the black luxury sedans in the driveway, it looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The security guard at the gate stared at the car for a long moment before lowering the window of his booth. "Delivery entrance is around the back," he said. "I'm not making a delivery," I told him calmly. "I'm here for dinner." He looked surprised, but he opened the gate. Inside the house, things didn't get much better. The butler greeted me with a polite smile that tightened the moment he looked at my coat. "Good evening," he said. "May I take that for you?" He studied my clothes again before adding, "Dinner is this way." But he was guiding me toward the service hallway. "I believe the dining room is in the other direction," I said gently. He paused, then turned around without another word. The son-in-law was waiting near the entrance to the dining room. Tall, perfect suit, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that only comes from growing up with money. Before I could step into the room, he pulled me aside. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly, "tonight is important." "I assumed that," I replied. "We have guests," he continued, "business partners, investors." I nodded politely. Then he leaned closer. "So please try not to embarrass Angela tonight." The meaning was clear. Don't speak too much. Don't act out of place. Don't remind people where my daughter came from. I simply nodded. "I'll behave," I said. But when we walked inside, the first person to confront me wasn't the son-in-law. It was my daughter. Angela hurried toward me the moment she saw me. Her eyes went straight past me toward the front window where my car was visible in the driveway. "Mom," she whispered sharply, grabbing my arm. "Why did you drive that thing here?" "That thing still works," I said calmly. "You couldn't borrow a better car?" she said under her breath. "Andrew's parents are hosting investors tonight. Do you have any idea how this looks?" I studied my daughter's face. She wasn't angry. She was embarrassed. "I came to see you," I said. "Yes, but you could have tried not to make it obvious where you came from," she muttered. Before I could answer, the son-in-law stepped beside us. He looked past me through the window at the Ford sitting in the driveway. Then he laughed lightly. "That's yours?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "at least it made it up the hill." A few people at the table chuckled. "Those cars are built tough," he continued. "You probably need that reliability if you're still driving the same car after, 20 years? I didn't answer. He glanced at his father. "Of course," he added casually, "when someone doesn't go very far in life, they don't need much transportation." Another laugh moved around the table. My daughter looked down at the floor. Dinner started soon after. There were 12 seats at the long mahogany table. Mine was placed at the very end, right beside the swinging kitchen door. The servants moved in and out behind me, serving the first-course lobster bisque in delicate bowls. The father-in-law raised his wine glass. "So," he said casually, glancing toward me, "do you enjoy wine?" "Sometimes," I answered. "This bottle is a Bordeaux from 1996, he said proudly. "You don't usually find wines like this outside certain circles." One of the guests smiled politely. The son-in-law didn't say anything. Instead, he reached for the bread basket and pushed it toward me. "Help yourself," he said. "I'm not sure what they serve where you're from." I took a sip of water and stayed quiet. The real humiliation came with the second course. The mother-in-law finished the fish on her plate and gently pushed the dish toward me across the table. "There's still some left," she said sweetly. "You're welcome to it if you'd like." The table went very still. It was half a piece of fish, cold, covered in sauce. Leftovers. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then someone at the far end laughed softly. I felt every pair of eyes on me, but I simply folded my napkin beside my plate. "Thank you," I said calmly, "but I've already had dinner." The son-in-law leaned back in his chair. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Without saying anything, he slid it across the table toward me. The envelope stopped beside my plate. Then he said the words that started everything. "Take the $40,000 and get out of my wife's life." For a moment after my son-in-law pushed the envelope toward me, nobody moved. The laughter that had been floating around the table died instantly. 12 people sat frozen in their chairs. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting, watching. Rich people are very good at watching humiliation. It's a quiet kind of entertainment for them. The envelope rested beside my plate like it belonged there. $40,000. The son-in-law leaned back in his chair, completely confident. "You should take it," he said calmly. "It's a very generous offer." His father nodded in agreement. "It's more money than most people see in years," the older man added. The mother-in-law lifted her wine glass again, studying me over the rim with that same thin smile she had worn all evening. My daughter still wouldn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the tablecloth. The son-in-law tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. "All you have to do," he continued, "is stop showing up. Stop calling Angela. Stop interfering in our lives." He shrugged lightly. "You go back to Albany. You live quietly. Everyone is happier." Someone near the center of the table chuckled. I reached forward and picked up the envelope. The sound of the cash shifting inside it was soft but unmistakable. The son-in-law watched me carefully. He thought he had already won. The father-in-law leaned toward one of the guests and whispered something that made the man smile. The mother-in-law looked satisfied. Even my daughter looked relieved. For a few seconds, I simply held the envelope in my hands. It was heavier than most people realize. $40,000 in $100 bills is not light. Then I stood up. Chairs creaked slightly as several people shifted to watch me. The son-in-law frowned. "Where are you going?" he asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked toward the large stone fireplace that dominated the far wall of the dining room. A real fire was burning inside it, not one of those fake gas flames rich people install for decoration. This one was real wood. Orange flames crackled quietly against the dark logs. I stopped in front of it. Behind me, someone spoke. "You're not leaving already, are you?" the father-in-law asked with a mocking tone. Another guest laughed softly. Then I opened the envelope. Several stacks of fresh $100 bills slid into my hand. The sound was unmistakable. Paper money makes a particular whisper when it moves. The room went very still. The son-in-law stood halfway out of his chair. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I tossed the entire stack of bills into the fireplace. The flames swallowed the money almost instantly. Green ink curled and blackened as the paper shrank in the heat. Gasps erupted around the room. "What the hell?" someone shouted. The son-in-law jumped to his feet. "Are you insane?" he barked. The mother-in-law nearly dropped her wine glass. $40,000, she cried. But the fire didn't care. Money burns just like any other paper. Within seconds, the first stack was already turning to ash. I dropped the rest of the envelope in after it. The flames surged higher for a moment. The smell of burning paper filled the room. And then there was silence. The kind of silence that only happens when wealthy people watch money disappear. The son-in-law stared at the fireplace like he couldn't understand what he was seeing. "You just burned $40,000, he said slowly. I turned back toward the table. "That wasn't my money," I replied calmly. The father-in-law stood up now too. "You ungrateful woman," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" I walked back to my seat and sat down. The servants had completely stopped moving. Even the kitchen door behind me was still. No one was eating anymore. The son-in-law shook his head in disbelief. "You could have taken that money and lived comfortably for years," he said. "I already live comfortably," I answered. That seemed to irritate him even more. His mother leaned forward, her voice cold. "You're not in a position to reject generosity." Before I could respond, the father-in-law slammed his hand lightly against the table. "This is exactly what I expected," he muttered. "Pride without substance." He turned toward the son-in-law. "You tried to handle this politely." The younger man exhaled slowly. "Yes," he said. Then he looked at me again. "This dinner was supposed to be simple," he continued. "But clearly you'd rather make a scene." The room was tense now. Anger had replaced the earlier amusement. My daughter finally spoke. "Mom," she said quietly. Her voice sounded strained. "You shouldn't have done that." I looked at her for the first time since the envelope hit the table. "Shouldn't have done what?" I asked. "Burn the money," she said. Her eyes flickered nervously toward her husband and his parents. "You're making things worse." Before I could answer, the mother-in-law suddenly gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. "My necklace!" she cried. Everyone turned toward her. "The diamond necklace," she said, standing up. "It's gone." The son-in-law frowned. "What do you mean it's gone?" "It was right here," she said, pointing to the table beside her plate. "I set it down before dinner." The father-in-law looked around the table. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she insisted. "It was here." Guests began glancing at each other. Servants froze again. The son-in-law's expression hardened. "No one leaves this room," he said firmly. The words landed like a command. He looked slowly around the table. Then his eyes stopped on me. And I could already see the accusation forming in his mind. My daughter suddenly stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Mom, you walked past this side of the table earlier." The room went quiet again. Slowly, very slowly, everyone turned toward me. The son-in-law folded his arms. "Well," he said coldly, "this just keeps getting more interesting." My daughter stepped closer. Her hands were shaking. "I think, maybe we should check your purse," she said. I looked at her, and in that moment I understood exactly what was happening. I didn't resist. Because the moment she reached for my purse, the night would begin to collapse for everyone at that table. For 3 long seconds after my daughter said it, nobody moved. It was as if the whole room had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe. Then every face turned toward me. Not toward the mother-in-law with her trembling hand at her neck. Not toward the son-in-law whose little bribe was still turning to ash in the fireplace. Toward me, the old black woman at the end of the table. The one with the cheap coat, the old car, and the bad manners they had assigned to me before I ever sat down. My daughter stood beside her chair, pale and stiff, her voice still hanging in the air. "I think, maybe we should check your purse." I looked at her carefully. Her hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear of me. It was fear of them. The son-in-law stepped forward first, seizing control of the moment the way men like him always do. "That seems reasonable," he said. "If this is a misunderstanding, then we can clear it up right now." A misunderstanding. That was a neat little phrase, wasn't it? So much more elegant than set up. So much more polite than frame up. The father-in-law folded his napkin and placed it beside his plate with exaggerated calm. "Yes," he said. "Let's be sensible about this." The mother-in-law still stood with one hand to her chest, playing injured royalty. "It was my diamond necklace," she whispered. "Andrew gave it to me for Christmas, $25,000. That number was for the room, not for me. Rich people always announce the price of things when they want the poor person to feel smaller." One of the dinner guests gasped softly. Another leaned back in her chair like she didn't want scandal to splash on her dress. The son-in-law looked at me with false patience. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "if you didn't take it, then you have nothing to worry about." I let my fingers rest lightly on the small black purse in my lap. A plain leather bag, worn but clean, old enough that the stitching had softened with time. My daughter took one step closer. "Mom," she said, and her voice almost broke on the word. Please just let us look. There are few sounds more painful than hearing your child ask for permission to betray you. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply looked at her and said, Are you asking me or them? She flinched. The son-in-law answered for her. We're not doing this, he snapped. Open the purse. I kept my eyes on my daughter. Her gaze dropped immediately. That told me more than any confession would have. She knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not when they had decided to humiliate me. But she knew enough. The mother-in-law took a step toward us, her face twisted into righteous outrage. I knew this was a mistake, she said. I knew the moment she walked in looking the way she did. Andrew, I told you that woman would bring trouble into this house. That woman, not your wife's mother, not your guest. That woman. The father-in-law pointed toward my purse. Well, he said, are you going to cooperate, or do we call the police now? At that, one of the guests at the table shifted uncomfortably. Police at a dinner party in Westchester. That wasn't the kind of drama these people liked. They liked quiet cruelty, not public scandal. The son-in-law sensed it too, so he softened his tone. No one wants that, he said. Just let Angela check the bag. There it was. Not him. Not a servant. Not his mother. My daughter. He wanted the shame to come through blood. I slowly set my purse on the table in front of me. The room leaned in without moving. There, I said. The son-in-law nodded toward my daughter. Go ahead. She walked to my side, and even then she wouldn't look at me. Her perfume reached me before her hand did soft floral. Expensive. One I'd bought her once in a smaller bottle years ago when she got her first promotion. Back then she had hugged me and cried and said, Mama, you always know what makes me feel like a lady. Now her fingers hovered over my purse like she was about to search a stranger. Angela, I said quietly. She froze. That finally made her meet my eyes. What I saw there was not hatred. That would have been easier. It was weakness. Weakness wrapped in fear. Weakness dressed up as survival. I want you to remember this moment, I told her. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then the son-in-law snapped. For God's sake, open it. My daughter swallowed hard and unfastened the clasp. The click of that metal clasp opening sounded louder than the fire. She reached inside. For a second, her hand searched through the contents. My wallet. My glasses case. My keys. Then her fingers stopped. Her face changed. There was the smallest flicker in her expression. Not shock, recognition. And then she pulled it out. The necklace glittered under the chandelier. A sharp inhale moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. The mother-in-law clutched the edge of the table. There it is, she cried. I knew it. I knew she took it. The son-in-law let out a dark laugh, half triumph and half relief. Well, he said, that answers that. One of the women at the table whispered. Oh my God. The father-in-law rose slowly to his feet, looking down at me as though my guilt had just proven something he'd always believed. You should be ashamed, he said. Ashamed. After the leftover fish, after the envelope, after my daughter's eyes dropped every time her husband breathed. Ashamed. I looked at the necklace in my daughter's trembling hand. White stones, brilliant under the chandelier, fine enough to fool most people, good enough for a setup, but not good enough to fool me. I knew jewelry. I knew stones. I knew value. And the moment that necklace caught the light, I knew exactly what it was. More importantly, I knew exactly what it was not. The mother-in-law extended her hand. Give it to me, she said sharply. But my daughter didn't move. She was staring at the necklace like it had turned into a snake in her hand. The son-in-law reached over and took it from her himself. Then he held it up between two fingers and looked at me with disgust, so clean and polished it might have been taught to him at boarding school. I defended you, he lied. I told my parents we should handle this privately. I almost smiled. A man who had just tried to bribe me out of his wife's life was now pretending to be merciful. I should call the police, he said. The mother-in-law nodded vigorously. Yes, immediately. The father-in-law added, $25,000, that's felony theft. My daughter finally sat down again, but she looked like her bones had gone soft inside her skin. She still wouldn't look at me. The son-in-law pulled his phone from his pocket, and that was when I stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that every eye followed me. Interesting, I said. He frowned. What? I looked at the necklace in his hand and then at his mother. That necklace, I said, isn't worth $25,000. The entire room stilled again. The mother-in-law's face hardened instantly. What did you say? I lifted my chin and answered in the same calm voice I might have used to discuss the weather. I said, I repeated, that necklace is not diamond. The son-in-law stared at me. The father-in-law's face darkened, and for the first time all evening, my daughter looked up fast. Not at her husband, at me. Because somewhere deep inside herself, she knew the worst part of the night hadn't happened yet. The words landed in the room like a glass dropped on marble. I said that necklace is not diamond. For one long second, nobody reacted. Then the mother-in-law gave a short, sharp laugh. It was the kind of laugh people use when they think someone has finally embarrassed herself beyond repair. Well, of course you'd say that, she snapped. What else would a thief say? The son-in-law tightened his grip on the necklace. His face had changed. The smug confidence was still there, but something uneasy had slipped in around the edges. He wasn't used to being interrupted when he was winning. The father-in-law folded his arms across his chest. You are in no position to comment on jewelry, he said coldly. I looked at him. In my experience, I said, the people most eager to talk about value are usually the ones least qualified to judge it. One of the guests let out a small, nervous cough. The son-in-law stepped closer to me. Enough, he said. This is over. You were caught with stolen property in your purse. I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes on the necklace. It was delicate enough from a distance. Good sparkle, neat setting, a respectable imitation for anyone who only understood money as labels and receipts, but not a real diamond necklace. Not even close. May I see it? I asked. The mother-in-law's face twisted. Absolutely not. I raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because it's mine, she snapped. And because you'll probably try to damage it, the father-in-law added. I almost laughed at that. Damage it. As if they hadn't already tried to use it as a weapon. The son-in-law lifted his phone. I'm calling the police. You can, I said calmly. But if you do, make sure you tell them the truth about what that necklace actually is. His hand paused. That pause was small. So small most people might have missed it. But I saw it. And so did my daughter. Angela's eyes moved quickly from her husband to the necklace and then to me. Her face had gone pale in that deep, chalky way that comes when shame and fear start fighting inside the same body. I knew that look. I had seen it once before, many years ago, when she was 10 years old and had broken a neighbor girl's doll but blamed the boy next door. She had stood in our kitchen wringing her little hands, waiting for me to tell her she could still fix things with silence. Instead, I had walked her back across the street and made her tell the truth. That night, sitting at that long table, I realized my daughter had spent years learning how not to be like me. The son-in-law cleared his throat. Go ahead, he said, though his voice was less steady now. Explain to us, Mrs. Thompson, how you became a jewelry expert. I met his eyes then. You already decided I was uneducated, I said, so I'm not sure you'd believe any answer I gave. His jaw tightened. That isn't what I said. Oh no? I asked. You mocked my car. You mocked my background. You implied I wasn't educated enough to sit at this table. You just did it with expensive words. The father-in-law cut in sharply. We are not discussing your feelings. No, I said. You never were. The mother-in-law gave an impatient wave of her hand. This is absurd. Andrew, call the police and be done with it. But the son-in-law still hadn't moved. That told me everything. He wanted authority. He wanted control. He wanted me cornered and ashamed. But he did not want uncertainty. And I had just handed him some. I stepped forward and held out my hand. Let me see the necklace. No, the mother-in-law said again. This time I turned to her directly. Then keep it, I said. But understand something. If the police come and you insist that piece is worth $25,000, you'll be making a statement you may later regret. The father-in-law's expression sharpened. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm being plain. That necklace is not diamond. The stones are too bright, too eager, too fiery. Real diamonds return light with restraint. These stones are showing off. A flicker of anger moved through the mother-in-law's face. You sound ridiculous. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I sound like someone who knows the difference between a diamond and moissanite. That word changed the air in the room. Not for everyone. The guests looked confused. My daughter looked frightened, but the son-in-law and his mother understood enough to feel the hit. The father-in-law frowned. Moissanite? He repeated. A diamond simulant, I said. A decent one. Good enough for travel jewelry, good enough for a fake accusation, but not worth $25,000. The mother-in-law stood so abruptly her chair pushed back against the rug. You lying woman? I didn't move. You can insult me all you like, I said. It won't turn that necklace into a diamond. The son-in-law looked down at the necklace in his hand for just a second too long. There it was again. Doubt. Tiny, controlled, but visible. Angela saw it too. Her fingers tightened around her napkin so hard I thought it might tear. That was when I knew she hadn't planned every detail. She may have agreed to help. She may have followed their instructions. But she had not known everything. That gave me no comfort. Betrayal doesn't hurt less just because it was orchestrated by stronger people. In some ways, it hurts more. Because weakness in the people we love is what opens the door for monsters. The father-in-law took a step toward me. You seem remarkably calm for someone who's just been caught stealing. I turned my head and looked at him. Because I wasn't caught stealing. The son-in-law laughed once, bitter and sharp. We found the necklace in your purse. No, I said. You found the necklace in my purse. Because that's where you expected it to be. His eyes hardened. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I looked at my daughter. Her chin trembled. She knew what I was doing. She knew I was waiting, giving her one last chance. Angela, I said softly. The room seemed to pull inward around us. My daughter looked at me, and for the first time that evening, I let her see exactly what was inside my face. Not rage, not panic. Disappointment. Pure, unbearable disappointment. Would you like to tell them what really happened? I asked. Or should I? The son-in-law spun toward her. What is she talking about? My daughter's lips parted, but no sound came out. The mother-in-law moved fast. Don't you dare answer that, she snapped. Too fast, too defensive. And that was a mistake. The father-in-law looked at his wife, then at his son, then back at me. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Not toward truth. Men like him don't go toward truth first. They go toward risk. He was trying to calculate whether this was still manageable. The son-in-law took another step toward me. If you're about to make some wild accusation, I reached up calmly and touched the small magnolia brooch pinned to my dress. His words stopped. The mother-in-law saw the gesture too, and the color drained from her face. Just a little. Not enough for the guests to notice, but enough for me. I smiled. Not kindly. Before anyone makes another phone call, I said, I think there's something you all need to see. The moment I touched the magnolia brooch pinned to my dress, the mother-in-law stopped breathing right in front of me. Not literally, but close enough. Her lips parted. Her eyes widened. And for the first time that evening, she looked less like a woman in control and more like someone who had just heard the first crack in a dam she thought would hold forever. The son-in-law noticed it too. He looked from my face to his mother's, then back to the brooch. What is that supposed to mean? He asked. I lowered my hand and smoothed the front of my dress, as if we were discussing the weather. It means, I said, that you should all be a little more careful before deciding what happened in this room. The father-in-law's voice came out clipped and hard. Stop speaking in riddles. I turned toward him. I'm not speaking in riddles, I said. I'm trying to give this family one last chance to act with a shred of dignity. The mother-in-law found her voice first. That woman is bluffing, she snapped. Andrew, call the police now. But she was too fast again. Too sharp. And fear always sounds different from outrage if you've lived long enough to hear both. The son-in-law hesitated with his phone still in his hand. That hesitation told the whole room more than he realized. He wanted to look decisive, but uncertainty had started to spread through him like cold water under a closed door. My daughter had gone completely still. Her hands were locked in her lap. The napkin there looked twisted so tight it might tear in two. I looked at her for only a second. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The son-in-law stepped toward me immediately. What are you doing? Correcting the narrative, I said. I unlocked the screen. The room seemed to lean inward without moving. Even the guests were no longer pretending this was ordinary dinner conversation. One of the women had both hands wrapped around her wine glass. Her husband kept adjusting his cuff as though that small motion could distance him from what he was witnessing. The father-in-law frowned. If you think showing us old text messages or some nonsense from the internet is going to save you, it's not from the internet, I said calmly. I tapped the screen twice and turned it outward. It's from this room. The mother-in-law's face turned the color of old paper. The son-in-law didn't notice at first. He was too busy trying to keep his expression under control. But my daughter noticed. Angela noticed because she knew something was coming, and children always know the sound of the truth when it finally comes walking down the hall. On the screen was video footage. Sharp, clear, color-rich. It showed the dining room from my point of view, slightly angled downward from my chest. No one spoke. I let the first few seconds play. There was the table. There were the guests. There was the envelope. There was my son-in-law sliding it toward me and saying in his own voice, "Take the $40,000 and get out of my wife's life." The father-in-law's head snapped toward his son. The guests stared openly now. The woman with the wine glass blinked rapidly. I kept the video going. There I was, walking to the fireplace. There was the cash disappearing into the flames. There were the gasps. And then the room on the screen settled back into the same tense chaos we were standing in now. I scrubbed forward with my thumb. "No," the mother-in-law said suddenly. It came out almost like a plea. I ignored her. "Now," I said quietly. "Watch carefully." The video showed her lifting her hand to her throat and crying that her necklace was missing. Then came the part that mattered. On screen, my daughter stood and approached me. Everyone in the room watched their own faces, watching the moment happen again. Angela opening my purse. Angela reaching inside. Angela pausing. And then, clear as daylight, the briefest movement before her hand came back out. A flick. A tuck. A placement. A practiced little motion that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not trained to study detail. But the camera caught everything. The necklace had not come out of my purse. It had gone into it first. The son-in-law made a sound I can only describe as the noise a man makes when certainty leaves his body too fast. My daughter shut her eyes. The mother-in-law grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. The father-in-law stared at the screen with open disbelief. I let the video play one more second. There, on the recording, was the mother-in-law giving my daughter the smallest signal before Angela moved. Just a tilt of the head. A glance. Nothing theatrical. Which made it worse. It looked practiced. Like the kind of communication that grows between people who have rehearsed cruelty together. I stopped the video. The room was silent again. But not the earlier kind. This was heavier. This was truth landing. The son-in-law spoke first, though his voice sounded like it belonged to somebody smaller. "That doesn't prove anything." I looked at him. "It proves your wife put that necklace in my purse." His jaw clenched. Maybe she panicked. Maybe she thought she saw it there already and... "No," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. No, she didn't. My daughter started crying then. Not loudly. Just a quiet, ashamed breaking apart at the center of the room. "Mom," the mother-in-law cut her off. "Do not say another word." That was the third mistake she made that night. Maybe the fourth. Because control is most fragile at the moment, it reveals itself too openly. The father-in-law turned slowly toward his wife. "What did she mean by that?" he asked. His voice had changed. He still sounded like a man used to authority, but now there was something else under it. Fear. Not moral fear. Practical fear. He wasn't asking whether his wife had done something wrong. He was asking how much damage had already been done. The mother-in-law lifted her chin. "This is ridiculous," she said. That camera angle could distort anything. I almost admired the audacity. "Distort?" I asked. "Would you like me to play it again?" She said nothing. I turned to my daughter. "Angela." She shook her head immediately, tears slipping down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." There it was. At last. But too late to save anyone. The son-in-law stared at his wife like he didn't recognize her. Then he turned toward his mother. "What did you do?" His mother's composure cracked. "What did I do?" she repeated. "I protected this family. That's what I did." The guests looked away now, embarrassed to be in the room but too fascinated to leave it. The father-in-law's face had gone dark. "Protected us from what?" She pointed at me with a trembling hand. "From her. From this. From the humiliation of having that woman attached to our family forever. That woman again. Even caught in her own ugliness, she couldn't give me my name." The son-in-law ran a hand over his mouth. "You staged this?" "I gave Angela an opportunity," she snapped. "That's all. If your wife had any backbone, we wouldn't have had to do it this way." My daughter made a broken sound in the back of her throat. I looked at her and felt something colder than anger move through me. Because that apology she had just offered me was real. But the betrayal had been real too. And one does not cancel the other. The father-in-law sank slowly back into his chair. He looked older than he had 20 minutes earlier. He looked like a man realizing the women in his house had turned a social problem into legal exposure. The son-in-law stared at the brooch on my dress. "That thing recorded all of this?" "Yes," I said. His voice was low now. "What is it?" "A high-definition recording device," I answered, "disguised as costume jewelry." The guests shifted again. I could see them recalculating me in real time. Not poor, not simple, not harmless, just patient. And patience frightens cruel people more than anger ever will. The mother-in-law was breathing too fast. "You had no right to record us in our own home." That almost made me smile. A woman who just tried to frame me for felony theft is suddenly worried about rights. The father-in-law looked up sharply. "Felony?" I turned toward him. "That depends," I said, "on whether you still intend to tell the police that this necklace is worth $25,000. The son-in-law looked at the necklace in his hand again, then at me. And for the first time all night, he didn't look like a man insulting his wife's mother. He looked like a man beginning to understand he had sat the wrong woman at the end of the table. My son-in-law kept staring at the necklace as if it might change under the chandelier if he looked at it long enough. That was the thing about men like him. They could accept cruelty faster than they could accept being fooled. Framing me for theft was manageable in his mind, but being made to look stupid in front of investors, dinner guests, and his own father? That was the real wound. He held the necklace between two fingers, no longer with triumph, but with caution. "What are you saying?" he asked. His voice had lost some of its polish now. I stood at the end of the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. "I'm saying," I replied, "that if you plan to call the police and claim that necklace is worth $25,000, you may want to be very sure that statement is true." The father-in-law looked from me to the necklace, then to his wife. The older man wasn't moral enough to be horrified, but he was practical enough to smell danger. "What exactly is it worth?" he asked. The mother-in-law spun toward him. "Don't listen to her." I didn't take my eyes off the necklace. "That depends," I said. "If it's solid gold with natural diamonds, perhaps more. If it's what I think it is, then you're all standing in the middle of a very embarrassing lie." The son-in-law's jaw tightened. "You keep talking like an expert." I finally looked at him. "And you keep talking like a man who has confused confidence with knowledge." That landed harder than I expected. One of the dinner guests let out a soft breath through her nose, almost a laugh, then immediately looked down at her lap. Her husband shifted in his chair and reached for his water glass. No one wanted to be the first to admit I might know what I was talking about. The mother-in-law recovered fastest, as women like her often do. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and put every remaining ounce of her status into her voice. "That necklace was purchased in Paris," she said. "From a private jeweler. Andrew paid $25,000 for it himself." I tilted my head. "Did he?" The son-in-law answered too quickly. "Yes." That was enough to tell me it wasn't true. The father-in-law heard it too. His eyes flicked toward his son, narrowing just slightly. Wealthy families may lie to outsiders together, but internally, they listen for weakness like wolves. I took one step toward the center of the room. "May I explain something?" I asked. "No," the mother-in-law snapped. "Yes," the father-in-law said at the exact same time. His wife turned to him in disbelief. But the older man was no longer performing for the guests. He was assessing exposure. "Go ahead," he said to me. I nodded once. "Real diamonds," I said. "Return light differently. They're sharper, more restrained. Good stones don't scream from across a room. This necklace does. The brilliance is too aggressive. The rainbow fire is too strong. That suggests moissanite." The son-in-law scoffed. "You're making that judgment from across a table?" "No," I said. "I made that judgment the moment your wife pulled it from my purse. Now I'm giving you the courtesy of hearing it explained." My daughter pressed her fingers to her lips. She was crying quietly now, tears slipping down without drama, without noise. In another room, at another time, I might have gone to her. I might have held her face in my hands and asked what kind of fear had turned her into someone I barely recognized. But not there. Not yet. The mother-in-law laughed again, but it was thinner this time. This is absurd. She steals from me, gets caught on camera. Your daughter-in-law put it in my purse on camera, I said. The room fell still again. The mother-in-law's nostrils flared. Then I continued. And what she planted was not $25,000 worth of jewelry. So if the police arrive and you lie about the value, then your family moves from humiliation into fraud. The word fraud changed everything. The father-in-law stood very still. The son-in-law lowered his phone, but did not put it away. The guests stopped pretending to be invisible. One of the men at the middle of the table cleared his throat and said, "Perhaps we should all slow down." Nobody answered him. I extended my hand toward the necklace. "Give it to me." The son-in-law hesitated. The father-in-law spoke without taking his eyes off me. "Andrew." That was all he said. But it was enough. Reluctantly, my son-in-law crossed the space between us and placed the necklace in my open palm. It was lighter than a truly fine piece should have been. The clasp was neat but cheap. The setting had been designed to impress at a glance, not survive scrutiny. I held it up to the chandelier light. The room watched my hand. No one interrupted. "When a stone like this catches light," I said, rotating it slowly, "you look for how it breaks the white. A diamond gives you brilliance. Moissanite gives you spectacle. Too much color, too much show. It's jewelry for people who want to appear wealthy, not for people who understand quality." That one hit the mother-in-law like a slap. "You insolent." I lifted my free hand slightly, and to my surprise, she stopped. Because now she wasn't dealing with the old woman they had mocked at dinner. Now she was dealing with someone speaking a language she didn't understand but feared anyway. I examined the clasp more closely. Then I smiled. Small. Cold. "There's more." The son-in-law's face tightened. "What?" I turned the necklace so the back of the setting caught the light. "No maker's mark," I said. "No serial inscription. No proper hallmark. If this came from a high-end Paris jeweler, then either they sold you trash or that story is fiction." The father-in-law's face changed. Not much. Men like him train their faces the way soldiers train their bodies. But I saw it. Recognition. He had either never seen a receipt, or he knew perfectly well his wife's version of events wasn't solid. The mother-in-law's voice rose half an octave. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked directly at her. "Oh, I do," my daughter whispered. "Mom." I turned toward her. "What?" She looked shattered. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't know it was fake." And there it was. Not innocence. Not absolution. Just another layer of ugliness exposed. The son-in-law rounded on her. "What do you mean you didn't know?" She flinched so hard her chair scraped backward. His mother cut in immediately. "She's upset. She doesn't know what she's saying." But the father-in-law was watching all of them now with the cold, alert eyes of a man realizing his family may be more dangerous to him than to anyone else. I set the necklace down carefully on the white tablecloth. The tiny sound it made was hollow, cheap, not the solid little weight of real money. Then I looked at the father-in-law and said the sentence that finally shifted the room from scandal into fear. "Would you like to know what else is fake in this house?" His head came up slowly. The son-in-law stared at me. The mother-in-law went still, because they all understood, at last, that I had stopped defending myself, and started assessing them. The question sat in the middle of the room like a lit match. "Would you like to know what else is fake in this house?" No one answered me. My father-in-law's face lost the last bit of color it had left. My son-in-law looked at me the way men look at a road just before they realize the bridge is gone. My mother-in-law, for all her cultivated poise, had gone perfectly still. Only my daughter moved. She shook her head once. A small, frightened motion. Not because she knew what I was about to say in full, but because somewhere inside herself, she had finally understood that the woman they spent all evening humiliating was not the helpless fool they thought they had invited to dinner. I let the silence hold for a few seconds longer. Then I turned to my father-in-law. "You asked what that necklace is worth," I said. "Market value?" "A few $100s. Maybe 500 if someone is sentimental or gullible. But that's not the interesting part." He swallowed. "What is the interesting part?" "The interesting part," I said, "is why your wife needed everybody in this room to believe it was worth $25,000. My mother-in-law found her voice again. "This is outrageous." "No," I replied. "What's outrageous is offering a dinner guest cash to disappear, planting jewelry in her purse, and then trying to call the police over a costume necklace." My son-in-law stepped forward, his face flushed. "Stop saying costume necklace." I looked at him. "Would you prefer synthetic moissanite mounted in gold-plated metal with no maker's mark?" He opened his mouth, then shut it again. That would have satisfied me for the moment, but what happened next told me more than anything else all evening. One of the guests, the older man sitting halfway down the table, cleared his throat and spoke carefully, like a man trying to preserve his good shoes while stepping around a mess. "Andrew," he said, addressing my son-in-law, "is this the necklace your mother wore to the Mercer Foundation gala last month?" The mother-in-law turned her head sharply. "What difference does that make?" The guest hesitated. "Because my wife commented on it afterward. She said it looked different from the one you usually wear." His wife immediately looked down, embarrassed to have been pulled into it. But the damage was done. I turned back to my mother-in-law. "So there is another one." Her silence answered for her. My father-in-law slowly lowered himself into his chair. He looked suddenly exhausted, as if age had arrived all at once and chosen that moment to settle into his bones. "There's a real one?" he asked. His wife spun toward him. "This is not the issue." "It is now," he said. That was the first honest sentence anyone in his family had spoken all evening. I watched her face harden, then shift. She was recalculating. Women like her survive on instinct, not moral instinct, social instinct, strategic instinct. She was trying to decide which lie would cost the least. My son-in-law stared at his mother. "Is there a real necklace?" She lifted her chin. "Yes." The word came out, clipped and furious. "And this one," I asked, "is the travel version? The imitation? The one you'd rather lose than the real piece?" She folded her arms. "A lot of women do that. Do they also plant the imitation on their daughter-in-law's mother and claim grand theft?" Her eyes flashed. "You forced my hand." I almost laughed. That old language of people like her. The cruelty was always someone else's fault. The insult was always a reaction. The violence was always a necessity. My daughter let out a broken sound. "Please stop." We all turned toward her. Angela's face was wet now. Mascara had started to collect in the corners of her eyes. Her breathing was uneven. I should have felt satisfaction at seeing her finally crack. I didn't. All I felt was tired. Because there are some victories a mother never wants to win. My son-in-law looked at his wife like he didn't know whether to comfort her or blame her. "Did you know?" he asked. She shook her head quickly. "I knew your mother wanted to scare her," she whispered, glancing at me and then away just as fast. "I didn't know about the necklace. I didn't know it was fake. I didn't know she was going to call the police. That may even have been partly true. But truth in pieces is still not innocence." My mother-in-law gave her a look so cold it could have cracked crystal. "Don't start acting weak now." My daughter recoiled like she had been slapped. And in that moment I understood the shape of her marriage better than I ever had before. It wasn't simply that she had chosen status over family. It was that she had been slowly trained to believe cruelty was the price of belonging. The son-in-law ran a hand through his hair. "This got out of control." "No," I said. "This was control. That's the point." He turned to me. "What do you want?" The question came too quickly, too flatly. It told me he was frightened now. Good. Men like him don't become decent under pressure. They just become honest about what they value. And what my son-in-law valued most, even now, wasn't truth, or my daughter, or justice. It was containment. He wanted this fixed quietly. He wanted the night stitched closed before it bled into his business life. I took a slow breath. "What I want," I said, "is for everyone at this table to understand exactly where they are." The father-in-law looked up at me. "In my house," he said, though there was no confidence behind it. I met his eyes. "Is it?" That landed the way I intended it to. Small, simple, lethal. The room changed again. It wasn't dramatic on the surface. Nobody gasped. Nobody shouted. But fear has a scent to it, a rhythm, a subtle pulling inward, and suddenly it was everywhere. My son-in-law blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I reached into my purse and took out a slim black card case. I opened it, slid out one card, and placed it gently on the tablecloth beside the necklace. The black cardstock looked almost elegant against the white linen. Gold lettering, clean, heavy, intentional. My father-in-law was closest. He looked down first. Then his face changed. Not confusion. Recognition. The kind that arrives like a punch to the chest. My son-in-law grabbed the card and read it, then read it again. His lips parted. I could have recited the words myself. I knew them by heart. I had approved the embossing personally. Ruth Thompson, founder and managing principal. Thompson Asset Holdings. One of the guests said my name under his breath. Not the way people say a stranger's name. The way they say the name of someone they have heard before in rooms where money moves quietly. The father-in-law stared at me. No. Yes, I said. The mother-in-law's hand moved to the back of a chair. My son-in-law looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card as if one of those things might rearrange itself into safety. You, he began, but couldn't finish. I helped him. I buy distressed debt, I said. Commercial, residential, asset-backed when it's worth the trouble. Companies, properties, portfolios, reputations. Mostly I buy the messes men leave behind when they think no one is watching. The father-in-law's breathing had changed. He knew now. Maybe not everything yet, but enough. He leaned forward slowly. How much do you know? I smiled at him, but there was no warmth in it. Enough to know, I said, that the fake necklace isn't the most expensive lie in this house. The room stayed so quiet after I said it that I could hear the fire settling in the grate. Not crackling, settling, a low shift of wood collapsing into heat. That was what the Whitmore family sounded like to me in that moment. A structure that still looked impressive from the outside, even as something inside it had already begun to cave in. My father-in-law was the first to recover. Barely. He straightened in his chair, but the movement lacked the authority he had been wearing all evening. What exactly? He asked slowly. Are you suggesting? I looked at him across the length of the table. I'm not suggesting anything, I said. I'm telling you that this family made a very unwise decision tonight. My son-in-law still had my card in his hand. He kept turning it over as if he expected the back to say there had been some misunderstanding. There has to be some mistake, he said. That's possible, I replied, but not on my side of the table. The mother-in-law finally found enough air to speak. I don't care what title you printed on a card, she snapped. That doesn't change what happened here. I looked at her. It changes everything. No, she shot back. It doesn't. You still came into my home, insulted my family, and now you're trying to intimidate us with business jargon. Business jargon. That almost amused me. People love to call it jargon when they're hearing a language that can destroy them. My daughter whispered, Andrew. It was the first time she had spoken his name all evening with anything close to desperation. But her husband didn't answer her. His eyes were fixed on me. Thompson Asset Holdings, he said quietly. I know that name. Yes, I said, you should. The father-in-law's jaw tightened. That told me he knew it too. Not from charity galas or social circles, from paperwork. From warning letters his ego had probably thrown into a drawer instead of reading carefully. The guests at the table had stopped pretending to be neutral. One couple looked like they wanted to leave but were too afraid of being rude. The other man, the one who had mentioned the gala, now looked openly fascinated. Wealthy people love a downfall as long as it belongs to somebody else. The father-in-law folded his hands in front of him. What do you want? That was the second time someone had asked me that. And both times what they really meant was, how much will this cost me? I glanced at the necklace lying on the white linen beside my black card. A little honesty, I said. For a start. The mother-in-law laughed bitterly. You can't walk in here and threaten us because your feelings got hurt. I turned to her. My feelings, I said, have very little to do with this. Then I looked back at her husband. But his loans do. That did it. My father-in-law's face emptied all at once. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone who didn't understand finance to catch it. But I did. My son-in-law did too. He turned to his father so fast his chair nearly tipped. What loans? No one answered him. That silence told him more than any explanation could have. He looked at his father again. What loans? The older man still didn't answer. My daughter stared at her husband, then at his father, then at me. Confusion moved across her face like a storm front. This was new to her. She had known about the social cruelty. She had participated in it. But this, the money beneath the walls, this she hadn't seen. I decided to be kind and save them all a few seconds. Whitmore Capital has been in default for 4 months, I said. The mother-in-law made a sound like I'd slapped her. That's a lie. No, I said. That's accounting. The son-in-law was standing now. That's impossible. Is it? Yes, he said sharply. We're in the middle of expansion. We have new partnerships. We're closing on... The merger died 3 weeks ago, I said. That hit him harder than the necklace. I could see it in his face. His mouth stayed open for 1 second too long. His father closed his eyes. Just once. But that was enough. The son-in-law slowly turned toward him. Dad. Still no answer. Dad. The father-in-law opened his eyes and looked at his son with something close to contempt. Sit down. No, the younger man snapped. Tell me she's wrong. The mother-in-law stepped in, voice high and brittle. She is wrong. Of course she's wrong. This is a bluff. I let her speak. Women like her often do their best work while proving themselves foolish. Then I reached into my purse again and removed a folded document. Not theatrical. Not dramatic. Just paper. Always paper in the end. I unfolded it and set it down beside my card. Acquisition summary, I said. Filed this morning. The father-in-law didn't need to lean in to know what it was. He recognized the formatting immediately. Corporate documents become a kind of weather to men like him. They know the shape of a storm before they read the rain. The son-in-law snatched it up. His eyes moved rapidly over the page, then slowed, then stopped. No, he said again, but quieter this time. The father-in-law didn't ask for the paper. He already knew. He just sat there, older and smaller than he had been an hour earlier, while his son read the line that mattered. Whitmore Capital Debt Package, acquired by Thompson Asset Holdings. My daughter pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Andrew looked at me over the edge of the document. You bought our debt? I bought the package your lender no longer wished to babysit, I said. Yes. The mother-in-law shook her head violently. That doesn't mean anything. People refinance. People restructure all the time. True, I said. But that usually works better when they aren't also lying to investors, defaulting on obligations, and trying to accuse the creditor's managing principal of felony theft over a fake necklace. The guest with the water glass nearly choked. My son-in-law lowered the paper slowly. You're telling me, he said, that you own the debt on this house? I held his gaze. I'm telling you that your father used this property as collateral to keep his company afloat. I'm telling you he missed his deadlines. I'm telling you the lender exercised its rights. And I'm telling you that lender sold the paper to me. The mother-in-law turned to her husband with pure disbelief. You put this house up? He said nothing. Her face changed. For the first time all night, she looked stripped of performance. Not elegant. Not offended. Afraid. You told me we had time, she whispered. I thought we did, he said. That was the first honest thing he had offered the room. My daughter sank back in her chair. Her tears had stopped now, replaced by something flatter. Shock. The kind that arrives when a person realizes the whole stage has been painted cardboard. The son-in-law read the page again. There's an acceleration clause, he said. Yes, I answered. His eyes lifted to me. If there's material reputational harm, fraudulent conduct, or interference with collateral oversight. He stopped reading. The fire shifted again behind me. I folded my hands. That's right. He looked at me as if the room had tilted under his feet. Then he understood. Not all of it, but enough. The bribe, the setup, the false theft accusation, the threat of police. All of it on video, all of it tonight. All of it tied to a house already hanging by a thread. His voice came out almost as a whisper. You can call it now. I smiled. Small. Precisi. I can. The moment my son-in-law said, you can call it now, the room changed again. Until then, everyone had still been clinging to some version of denial. A misunderstanding. A bluff. An ugly dinner that might still be smoothed over if the right person said the right thing in the right tone. But that sentence stripped the illusion bare. He had read enough to understand that this was no longer about family embarrassment or a fake necklace or even his mother's little trap. This was about paper, collateral, default, the sort of words that don't care about pride. I looked at him steadily. Yes, I said, I can. My daughter made a small sound beside the table, like the air had left her all at once. Her husband kept staring at me. There was no arrogance left in his face now, no polished superiority, no smug little amusement over my car, my clothes, my so-called lack of education. Just fear, pure and obvious. "What does that mean?" Angela asked. Her voice trembled on the last word. I turned toward her, and for just a second, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who used to come home from school and sit at our kitchen table while I fried catfish on Fridays, telling me about teachers she liked and girls she didn't trust. The one who used to believe I could fix anything. But some things cannot be fixed in the moment they break. "It means," I said gently, "that your husband's family has been living on borrowed time." My father-in-law closed his eyes again, as if hearing me say it out loud made it more real. The mother-in-law whipped around toward him. "Tell me she's lying." He didn't answer. "Tell me," she said louder. He opened his eyes and stared at the far wall for a moment before finally speaking. "The bank extended us twice," he said flatly. "Then they sold the paper." Her face changed. Not just fear this time. Betrayal. Because that's the thing about people who build their lives on control. They can survive almost anything except being the last to know. "You told me the merger would close before it mattered. I thought it would." "You thought?" she snapped. "You thought?" The son-in-law rounded on his father. "You said the merger was solid." His father stood up abruptly. "Because it was supposed to be." His voice boomed through the dining room, and several guests flinched. There it was at last. The real family voice. Not polished. Not charitable. Not cultured. Just desperate. The father-in-law planted both hands on the table. The other side got nervous when the market shifted, and by then the bank was already circling. I was trying to buy us time. "With this house," the mother-in-law said. "You used this house." He looked at her with exhausted contempt. "I used whatever I had to use to keep the company breathing. By lying to all of us? By protecting this family." That almost made me laugh, because it was the exact same lie his wife had told 20 minutes earlier. Cruel people always think destruction counts as protection if it preserves their comfort long enough. My son-in-law turned back to me. "If you have the paper," he said, "why come here tonight? Why not just send lawyers?" That was a fair question. I folded my hands in front of me. "Because this was not just a business dinner," I said. "This was a test." His face hardened. "A test." "Yes." The guests shifted again, but none of them dared interrupt. I continued. "I wanted to see what kind of people I was dealing with before deciding how to proceed. Numbers tell me one part of the story. Character tells me the rest." The mother-in-law laughed bitterly. "So you came here pretending to be poor?" "No," I said. "I came here dressed like myself. You decided what poor looked like. That shut her up." My daughter lowered her head. The son-in-law glanced at the fireplace, then back at me. "The car," he said quietly. "Yes." "The coat." "Yes." "The whole thing." I held his gaze. "I live simply because I choose to. That's not the same thing as lacking options." The father-in-law sank back into his chair. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. One of the guests at the middle of the table spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Richard," he said to my father-in-law, "if the debt was sold, why didn't you disclose that before tonight?" My father-in-law looked at him with deadened eyes. "Because I didn't expect to spend dinner being dismantled in my own house," I answered for him. "He didn't disclose it because he thought image would hold longer than truth." The son-in-law looked down at the acquisition summary again, then at the fake necklace, then at the ashes in the fireplace. "You knew," he said. "I suspected enough," I answered. Tonight confirmed the rest. His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means that people under financial pressure reveal themselves quickly, especially when they believe the person in front of them has less power than they do." The mother-in-law pointed at me. "You set us up." I smiled without warmth. "No, I arrived on time for dinner. You offered me a bribe, insulted me, fed me your leftovers, framed me with imitation jewelry, and threatened to call the police. You set yourselves up. I just brought a brooch." The older woman's mouth opened, then shut again. There was nothing left for her in that moment except indignation, and indignation is a weak defense against documents. My daughter stood up slowly. "Please," she said, "can we stop talking like this?" Everyone turned toward her. Tears had dried on her cheeks, but her face looked wrecked all the same. "Please," she repeated. "This is my family." I looked at her for a long time. "No," I said softly. "This is your marriage. There's a difference." That landed harder than I intended. She sat back down like her knees had gone weak. The son-in-law swallowed hard. "If you call the clause," he said, "what happens?" I answered plainly. "The balance accelerates. All outstanding obligations become due immediately. Accounts under the relevant entities are subject to freeze. Collateral becomes enforceable. Vehicles, property, and major holdings tied to the default move into recovery." The room had gone so still again that every word sounded louder than normal. My father-in-law asked the next question because he was the only one at the table who fully understood it. "How quickly?" I met his eyes. "Fast enough that you should have treated me better at the fish course." One of the guests let out a shocked little breath that might have been a laugh if the situation had been less catastrophic. The son-in-law stepped closer. "You don't have to do this." And there it was at last. Not apology. Not remorse. Negotiation. I looked at him and saw the boy beneath the tailored suit, the one who had probably been raised to believe that every door had a price and every person could be managed if you found the right number. "An hour ago," I said, "you offered me $40,000 to disappear." His face reddened. "That was different." "No," I said. "It was revealing." The mother-in-law stood rigid at the side of the table. "If you destroy this family over one ugly dinner," I cut her off. "This family was already collapsing. Tonight just gave me the clause I needed." That sentence passed through the room like cold water. My father-in-law dropped his gaze. He knew I was right. The son-in-law still looked like he wanted one last way out. "So what now?" he asked. I took out my phone. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just with the calm of someone who had already made the decision before the question was asked. "Now," I said, unlocking the screen. I stopped being a guest. The moment I unlocked my phone, my son-in-law took a step toward me. "Wait." It came out too fast. Too sharp. Not the voice of a man making a reasonable request. The voice of a man hearing the floor crack under his shoes. I looked at him over the screen. "No." His father stood up again. Slower this time, like the weight of the room had settled into his knees. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, trying on courtesy now that fear had humbled him. "Let's not be hasty." Hasty. That word almost offended me. There had been nothing hasty about my evening. Not the drive. Not the insults. Not the fish plate his wife had pushed toward me as if I were some hungry stray. Not the envelope. Not the necklace. And certainly not the paper in my purse. I held my phone loosely in one hand. "Hasty," I repeated. "Your family tried to bribe me, humiliate me, frame me, and threaten me with police in under an hour. If anything, I've been remarkably patient." His wife gave a bitter little laugh. "Oh, please. You've been waiting for this." "Yes," I said. That shut her up quicker than shouting would have. Because the truth is hardest to answer when it arrives calmly. I looked back at my phone and opened the secure contact list. My daughter rose halfway from her chair. "Mama." That word caught me. Not because it softened me, because it reminded me how much had already been lost. She had not called me Mama all night. Not once. It had been Mom under pressure, please under fear, and silence under shame. Now that the world was slipping, she reached for the oldest name she knew. I turned to look at her. Her face was blotched from crying. Her hands trembled against the edge of the table. She looked young in the worst possible way, not innocent, but unformed, as if all the years she had spent trying to become this family's version of a wife had stripped something steady out of her. "Don't," I said quietly. Her lips parted. "I'm sorry." I believed her. That was the terrible part. I believed she was sorry. I just no longer believed sorry had enough weight to carry the damage. My son-in-law stepped between us slightly, not enough to seem aggressive, just enough to reclaim the center of the room. "You're emotional," he said to me, as if that might reduce me to something manageable. "No serious business decision should be made in a moment like this." I stared at him. An hour earlier, he had mocked my car, my background, my education, and my place in his wife's life. Now he wanted to talk about serious business. I almost admired the instinct. Cowardly men are often quickest to recognize power once it turns toward them. "I make serious business decisions in worse rooms than this," I said. Then I tapped the call button. The father-in-law's face changed instantly. Not panic, Recognition. He knew that call mattered. The phone rang once. Then a voice answered. Brooks. Good evening, I said. This is Ruth Thompson. I need you to initiate clause enforcement on the Whitmore package, effective immediately. The room didn't just go quiet. It recoiled. My son-in-law shook his head. No. His mother gripped the back of her chair so hard her knuckles turned pale. The father-in-law stood motionless, his face like stone, but sweat had started at his temples. Into the phone, I continued. Yes, full acceleration, material reputational harm, attempted fraud, and direct exposure risk. I'll forward the video file as supporting documentation. Brooks said something I didn't need to repeat aloud. Yes, I answered. Freeze the associated entities and prepare recovery on the residents and secured vehicles. Notify the sheriff's office if necessary. My daughter made a broken sound. Her husband moved toward me again. Stop this. I lifted one finger without looking at him. He stopped, not because he respected me, because something in my voice told him the next step would not go well for him. I finished the call simply, thank you. I'll remain on site another few minutes. Then I ended it and slipped the phone back into my purse. The silence that followed was different from every other silence of the night. Before, it had been humiliation, then exposure, then fear. This silence was calculation. Everyone in that room was trying to understand how fast a life could collapse. My father-in-law spoke first. You've frozen the accounts. It wasn't a question. Yes. His shoulders dropped just enough for me to notice. The son-in-law looked from me to his father. What does that mean? His father turned slowly toward him, and the contempt in his face surprised even me. It means, he said, that payroll is dead by morning. The younger man went white. His mother looked between them. That's absurd. Accounts don't just freeze because one woman makes a phone call. One woman? I asked. Then I smiled, and this time it was not kind at all. No, they freeze because a lender exercises rights under a defaulted agreement after borrowers commit actionable misconduct on camera. The father-in-law sank into his chair. He looked like a man who had spent so many years pretending to command storms that he no longer remembered what helplessness felt like. My daughter whispered, Andrew. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me like I had become a language he should have learned years ago. Can this be undone? He asked. Not should. Not would. Can. A practical question. A frightened question. The kind men ask when they still think the world is made of mechanisms instead of consequences. Yes, I said. All three of them moved at once. His mother straightened. He stepped toward me. Even my daughter looked up with a flash of hope so painful it almost made me look away. Then I finished. With enough money. The hope died so fast it was almost cruel. The father-in-law laughed once under his breath. It was ugly and hollow. Well, he said, we appear to be short on that. I glanced at the document still lying on the table beside my card and the fake necklace. That's usually how default works. One of the guests stood then, awkwardly clutching his jacket. I think perhaps my wife and I should go. No one tried to stop him. That was another shift in the room. At the beginning of the night, the Whitmores had been hosts. Now people were looking for exits. The mother-in-law seemed to realize it too. No, she snapped, too late and too loudly. No one is leaving like this. The couple froze. Then the woman said, with forced softness, Genevieve, I think this is a private matter. Private. As if public humiliation, false accusations, and financial collapse could still be put back behind a velvet curtain and whispered over. My daughter sank into her chair and covered her mouth. My son-in-law still hadn't sat down. He had the restless posture of a man searching for control in the air because it no longer existed on the ground. What do you want from us? He asked. There it was again. Always that question. As if every injury could be priced. As if all power must eventually name its number. I took my seat at the end of the table again, the place they had chosen for me, and folded my hands in front of my untouched plate. I want you, I said, to understand something very clearly. No one moved. No one spoke. I continued. When I drove up in that old Ford, you saw poverty. When I wore a plain coat, you saw low breeding. When I stayed quiet, you saw ignorance. That is why people like you lose everything, because you mistake restraint for weakness and simplicity for need. My son-in-law looked like he wanted to answer, but couldn't find a sentence that would help him. His father did not even try. His mother's face had twisted into something meaner than rage. This was hatred now, pure and useless. My daughter stared at the table as if it might open and swallow her. I stood again, slowly, deliberately, and when I spoke next, I made sure every syllable landed. "You invited me here tonight as a burden," I said. "You seated me by the kitchen door. You fed me leftovers. You offered me cash to disappear. But I was never the least powerful person in this room." I looked at the son-in-law, then his mother, then his father, and finally my daughter. I was the owner waiting to inspect the house. No one in that room knew what to do with that sentence. I was the owner waiting to inspect the house. It settled over the table more heavily than the accusation, more heavily than the necklace, more heavily than the call I had just made, because humiliation can still be explained away. A family scandal can be managed. A bad dinner can be rewritten by morning. But ownership is harder to argue with. Ownership changes the air. My father-in-law looked down at the white linen tablecloth as if he might find some forgotten number there that would put the world back where he liked it. My mother-in-law stood perfectly still, one hand still gripping the chair as though the furniture might remain loyal even if the house no longer did. My son-in-law had gone quiet in the most dangerous way, not because he accepted reality, but because he was still searching for some angle, some pressure point, some final way to negotiate himself back into comfort. My daughter did not look at any of us. She stared at the untouched fish on the table, at the half-empty wine glasses, at the fake necklace beside my black card. It was as if she finally understood that this dinner would divide her life into a before and an after. The father-in-law spoke first. "What does inspection mean?" he asked. His voice was tired now, not weak, just old. I answered plainly. "It means my team will inventory every secured asset on the property. Furniture, vehicles, artwork, jewelry worth documenting, office equipment, anything tied to the collateral schedule or the residence itself." The mother-in-law let out a sharp breath. "You can't just walk in here and touch my things." I looked at her. "Your things?" She straightened. "Yes, mine." I let that hang there for a second. Then I said, "That depends on what your husband pledged when he was trying to keep the company from collapsing." Her eyes snapped toward him. The older man didn't answer quickly enough. That silence was enough. She took one unsteady step toward him. "You told me this house was protected." He rubbed both hands over his face. "I told you what I believed at the time." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "No, you told me what would keep me quiet." The son-in-law looked from one parent to the other, stunned in the way only pampered sons can be when they realize their inheritance was built on paperwork instead of certainty. "This house can't be collateral," he said. "Not all of it." His father looked at him with a level, exhausted stare. "This house can be anything a desperate man signs." That finally shut him up. My daughter whispered, "Oh my God." I looked at her and saw the tremor in her shoulders. She was not crying now. Crying had passed. This was the colder stage, the one where grief begins organizing itself into memory. One of the guests cleared his throat again, standing halfway from his chair and then sitting back down as if even leaving now felt dangerous. The woman beside him said carefully, "Perhaps we should give the family some privacy." This time no one argued. That told me more than anything else. At the start of the night, these guests had watched me the way people watch a stain spread across a white rug, amused, curious, slightly disgusted. But now they were no longer witnesses to my humiliation. They were witnesses to the Whitmore's exposure, and that made them eager to disappear. "Of course," I said, saving them the embarrassment of having to ask permission in a house that no longer felt like theirs. "You may leave." My mother-in-law turned on me instantly. "You have no right to dismiss guests from my table." I smiled at her. "No, but I do have the right to spare them from the next part." That silenced her because she knew I meant it. The two couples rose at last, awkward and pale. One of the men muttered something about calling later. No one answered him. The women gathered their wraps and handbags with the polite urgency of people leaving a funeral before the body is lowered. They passed me with stiff little nods, as if uncertain whether I was the victim or the undertaker. By the time the dining room doors closed behind them, only the family remained. And me. The son-in-law walked to the sideboard and poured himself a drink with shaking hands. "That was deliberate," he said without looking at me. "What was?" letting them stay long enough to hear all this. I considered him for a moment. No, I said. What was deliberate was you trying to buy me off in front of witnesses. He turned. The glass in his hand trembled just enough to make the scotch shiver. That was a mistake. No, I said. That was character. My daughter flinched at that. The father-in-law lowered himself fully into his chair and loosened his tie like a man who had finally stopped pretending the room was survivable. What happens tonight, he asked. Again, not morally, logistically. That was why men like him remained dangerous longer than they should. They felt no shame until it acquired a process and a deadline. I answered with the same calm I might have used in a conference room. Tonight, the secured accounts begin locking. The property is flagged. By morning, legal notices go out. Depending on how cooperative you choose to be, recovery can be civil or unpleasant. My mother-in-law gave a brittle laugh. You're enjoying this. I looked at her for a long time. No, I said. I'm finishing it. That hit harder than anger would have. Because anger can be argued with. Completion cannot. My daughter stood then, slowly, carefully, like someone rising in church after realizing the sermon was about her. Mama, she said. I turned. There it was again, that old name. The child's name for me, dragged out into a room that had done everything in its power to make me smaller. What? I asked. Her mouth trembled. I was wrong. The words were simple. No performance. No excuse. No looking at her husband or his parents to see if she was allowed to say them. Just the truth. And that made it harder, not easier. Because if she had stayed cruel, I could have wrapped myself in coldness and called it strength. But weakness mixed with honesty is something mothers are made to answer to, even when it arrives too late. I said nothing. So she kept going. I thought. She swallowed hard. I thought if I kept peace with them, things would settle down. I thought if I just did what they wanted, we'd be okay. Her husband snapped. Angela, don't! She turned on him with a force I had not seen from her all night. No. Don't tell me what to do now. That startled all of us, including her. She looked at him with a face so stripped of illusion it almost seemed older. You asked my mother to take money and disappear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She turned toward his mother. And you told me this was just a lesson. You told me she needed to be humbled. The mother-in-law drew herself up. She did. My daughter stared at her. No, she said. I did. That broke something in the room. Not visibly. Not loudly. But completely. The father-in-law looked away. The son-in-law drained the rest of his drink. And I stood there at the end of the table, feeling the truth move through the room like smoke. Then my phone buzzed once in my purse. I took it out and looked at the screen. A message from Brooks. Enforcement initiated. Sheriff notification pending. Team can be on site within the hour. I lifted my eyes to the family. The process has started, I said, and when they looked at me, I could see that at last they understood something they should have learned before the first insult left their mouths. The dinner was over. The taking had begun. The message on my phone glowed for only a second, but it changed the room more completely than anything else that night. Enforcement initiated. Sheriff notification pending. Team can be on site within the hour. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my purse. The process has started, I said. No one answered. My son-in-law stood motionless by the sideboard with his empty glass still in his hand. His father remained seated, shoulders bent, staring at the table as if numbers might rise up out of the linen and offer him mercy. His mother had one hand pressed against the back of her chair and the other at her throat, but there was no necklace there now, just bare skin and panic. And my daughter looked at me the way children look at a parent when they realize, too late, that the world they trusted was made of cardboard. The father-in-law spoke first. How long do we have? The question came out low, flat, exhausted. I answered with the same plainness he had used. Not long. His wife turned toward him sharply. What does that mean, Richard? He shut his eyes for a moment. It means, he said, we stop pretending this is going away. She gave a brittle laugh that sounded one breath away from hysteria. No, this is still our home. You can call lawyers. You can fix this. That's what you always do. He looked at her then, and for the first time all evening, he seemed too tired to protect either her or himself with lies. There may not be anything left to fix. That was the sentence that broke her. Not mine. His. She sank into her chair as if her knees had simply given up under the weight of reality. My son-in-law finally set his empty glass down. "Ruth," he said. "Not Mrs. Thompson. Not Angela's mother. Not that woman. Just my name." Funny how quickly respect appears when power changes direction. "Yes?" I asked. He swallowed. "There has to be another option." I looked at him steadily. "There were many options," I said. "You passed all of them on your way to cruelty." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to be reasonable." "No," I said. "You're trying to survive." That silenced him. My daughter sat at the table with both hands clasped tightly in front of her. The ring on her finger caught the light. A beautiful ring, the kind designed to announce permanence. But marriage, like wealth, looks strongest right before the hidden cracks begin to show. She stood slowly. "Mama," she said again. I turned toward her. There are moments in a mother's life when she can feel her heart breaking and hardening at the same time. That was one of them. "I am not asking you to fix this," she said. "I know I don't deserve that." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I just need you to know." I knew it was wrong. I knew it even before I opened your purse. I knew it when Andrew gave you that envelope. I knew it when his mother pushed that plate at you. I knew it every time I kept quiet. I didn't interrupt. "Then why didn't you stop it?" I asked. Her face folded in on itself. "Because I was ashamed." The word landed harder than I expected. Not because it surprised me, because it didn't. "Ashamed of what?" I asked softly. She looked at me with tears she was no longer trying to hide. "Of where I came from, of how hard you had to work, of the old car, of the way people looked at us when I was younger, of all the things I should have been proud of but turned into embarrassment because I wanted their world so badly." No one in the room moved. No one dared. I could feel my son-in-law listening, his mother listening, his father listening, but that moment belonged only to my daughter and me. "I thought if I acted like them," she said, "they would love me, and if they loved me, then all of it would mean I had become somebody better." I took a slow breath. "And did it?" She shook her head. "No." There it was, the answer that had probably cost her more than anything else that night. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, "Being accepted by broken people does not make you whole." She cried harder at that, but quietly, not dramatically. Not for the room, for herself. My son-in-law stepped forward. "Angela, stop." She turned on him with a calmness that chilled even me. "No," she said. "You stop." He froze. "You mocked her car," she said. "You mocked her education. You offered her money to disappear. You let your mother treat her like she was trash. And I helped you." He opened his mouth to defend himself, but his father spoke first. "Don't," the older man said. His son looked stunned. "You erred me," he said without lifting his eyes from the table. "Don't insult us all by pretending you didn't know exactly what you were doing." That was the end of something. Not the company, not the house. Something smaller and sadder. The family fiction that everyone had only been caught in a misunderstanding. No, they had all known. Some sooner, some deeper, some more willingly than others. But they had all known. My mother-in-law rose unsteadily. "So that's it?" she said, looking at me with naked hatred now. "You ruin us and walk away?" I picked up my purse. "No," I said. "You ruined yourselves. I'm simply refusing to stand in the wreckage and call it a home." She took a step toward me. "This is vengeance." I met her eyes. No, vengeance would have been louder. Then I looked around the room one last time. At the untouched food. At the wine glasses. At the fake necklace still lying beside my black business card. At the ashes in the fireplace where $40,000 had vanished because insult is still insult, no matter how neatly it's stacked. At my daughter. At the men who had mistaken money for immunity. And then I said what needed saying. "You invited me here as if I were a stain on your evening. A burden. A woman to be tolerated, corrected, bought off, and finally framed. But every cruel thing you did tonight told me more truth than any balance sheet ever could." I turned to my son-in-law. "You just tried to throw your lender out of your own house." His face went completely white. My daughter covered her mouth again. Her father-in-law didn't look up. His mother looked like she wanted to slap me, scream at me, beg me, and deny me all at once. I moved toward the dining room doors. No one tried to stop me. That was new too. At the beginning of the evening, They had tried to direct where I entered, where I sat, what I ate, how I spoke, how much of myself I was permitted to bring into their world. Now they simply watched me leave. In the front hall, the butler appeared as if out of habit, then faltered when he saw my face. He did not offer me the service corridor this time. He brought me my coat in silence. I took it from him and put it on slowly. Old wool, plain, warm, mine. Outside, the night air felt cold and clean in my lungs. The long driveway stretched ahead under the dim glow of landscape lights. My old blue Ford Taurus sat where I had left it, patient and unashamed, beside luxury cars that now looked less like symbols of success and more like inventory waiting to be tagged. I stood there for a moment with one hand on the car door. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My daughter. I turned. She had come out without a coat, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. She looked smaller outside that house than she had inside it. "Mama," she said. I waited. She stopped a few feet away. "Are you done with me too? There are questions no mother is ever ready to hear." I looked at my daughter, the child I had held, fed, prayed over, worked for, fought for, and I answered her as honestly as I could. "No," I said, "but I am done pretending this didn't happen." She cried at that, but she nodded, because she understood. Some endings are not clean. Some love survives, but it does not remain untouched. I opened the car door. Before I got in, I looked back once at the big lit house behind her. Then I said, "Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it just waits long enough for people to destroy themselves in front of it." I got into my car and started the engine. The old Ford turned over on the first try. Of course it did. Reliable things usually do. I pulled away from the curb and drove down the long, winding driveway without looking back again. In the rearview mirror, I could see my daughter standing there in the cold, the mansion glowing behind her like a lie that had finally been told in full. And as the gates opened and the road stretched dark and honest ahead of me, I felt something I had not felt all night. Not triumph. Not anger. Relief. Because I had walked into that house as the woman they thought they could shame. And I drove away as the only person at that table who had told the truth. The story reminds us that true dignity does not come from wealth, status, or appearances. People often judge others by the car they drive, the clothes they wear, or the background they come from. But character, patience, and integrity reveal the real measure of a person. Another powerful lesson is that arrogance blinds people to their own weaknesses. The Whitmore family believed money gave them the right to humiliate others, yet their greatest mistake was underestimating the quiet strength of someone they thought was powerless. The story also shows that betrayal hurts most when it comes from those we love, but facing the truth is the first step toward growth. The daughter learned too late that acceptance built on shame and cruelty is never real belonging. In the end, the message is simple. Respect people when you believe they have nothing, because dignity and power often wear the most ordinary faces. And sooner or later, truth has a way of revealing who truly stands strong when the illusion of status disappears.